Good Erev Shabbos, everybody. Rabbi Gershon Afson, Cincinnati, Ohio. Welcome back once again to our weekly shir in Pirkei Avos. Today, Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Nosai, Tovshin Pei. We begin our second cycle through the learning of Pirkei Avos. This follows the minhag to learn Pirkei Avos throughout the summer as well. Many people only say and learn Pirkei Avos until Shavuos, but many have the minhag, including Chasidei Chabad, to learn Pirkei Avos throughout the summer until Rosh Hashanah. It ends up being 4 cycles of learning, and today we begin the second cycle of Pirkei Avos with the very first Perek. Perek Rishon, the first Perek of Pirkei Avos, goes through a very large part of Jewish history, from Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai, from Moshe getting the Torah all the way to Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who starts off Perek Sheni. And in the middle of the Perek, we start learning about the Zugais, the peers. In other words, at a certain point, there wasn't one person that was the Nasi and Av Beis Din. It was divided into 2 jobs, 2 tafkidim, and they had Zugais, peers of people that would take upon themselves the position upon the passing of the previous generation. And we are going to be focusing on Mishnah Yud Aleph, the 11th Mishnah of the Perek, which is going to be a teaching of Avtalyon. Now, just to put everything in the right perspective, the group, the Zug of Avtalyon includes Shmaya, who's the author of Mishnah Yud, Shmaya and Avtalyon. Shmaya and Avtalyon were very unique from the Zugais. They were actually the teachers of Hillel, in the fact that they came or they were from Mishpachas Gedim. There's an argument in the Mefarshei HaMikra Mishnah if Shmaya and Avtalyon themselves were Gedim or they came from a family of Gedim. Either way, they rose up to tremendous heights, became the leaders of Yiddishkeit at that time. And obviously, as in many cases, certain people were not so appreciative of their rise to prominence. The Gemara actually tells us a story. This is in the Gemara Yuma, Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. The Gemara tells us that, again, we're talking about Bizman Shebeis Hamikdash Hayakayim. There was the Beis Hamikdash, the Bayis Rishon, and there was a Kohen Gadol that did his avoid in the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur. Now, everybody knows that going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, if someone was not worthy, was pikuach nefesh, they can lose their life. However, if they were worthy and they served Hashem properly, so then they would leave the Kodesh HaKadoshim and they would make a big Suda Matzah Yom Tif. Everyone would come and participate in a tremendous Suda that the Kohen Gadol would put out. And the Gemara tells us that there was a Kohen Gadol that was leaving the Beis Hamikdash after the Avodah of Yom Kippur, and the whole crowd, the Ganza Olam, was following him towards his house or wherever he was setting up his Suda. And the Olam, when they saw Shmaya and Avtalyon, they came and left the Kohen Gadol, and they went to follow Shmaya and Avtalyon. Now, the Kohen Gadol took it very personal. He lost his crowd, and he felt that Shmaya and Avtalyon, even though they did nothing, their just presence were there with all of Klal Yisrael, he wanted to shtech them, he wanted them to tease them, he wanted them to feel a little bit deflated. So when they came to give him Shalom Aleichem and to congratulate him on his Avodah, he told them like this, Yesun b'nei amomin l'sholim. Let those that come from other nations go in peace. He was trying to tell them that I'm a Kohen Gadol, which means that I am a big miyuchis. My Zayda was a Kohen, my Elta Zayda was a Kohen. In other words, I am the very, very elite part of Klal Yisrael. You guys are Tzugekumina, you just came from other nations. So let those that came from other nations go in peace. So they wanted to teach this Kohen Gadol, who had, at least Bashkaf Rishona, depends how you want to learn the story, an issue with his gaiva, an issue with his humility. And they told him like this: we truly come from other nations, but we actually follow the path of Zaydi Aaron. Aaron Akoyin was Oyev Sholem V'Roidev Sholem. So we may not be descendants of Aaron, but we are actually performing the avodah of Aaron. However, you may be a descendant of Aaron, but you are not performing the avodah of Aaron. In other words, what's the point of having a holy Zayda? Aaron HaKoyin, no one's belittling the schus to be a descendant, direct descendant of Aaron HaKoyin. But if you're not going to act like Aaron, so then you're not fitting to carry the name of Aaron. We may be from some families which are not the family of Aaron, but we carry the flagship, we carry the avoid of Aaron. And that's a tremendous lesson for us. You know, when people start speaking about their yichus and where they come from, there's a famous expression that yichus is like a big zero. If you don't put anything in front of it, if you don't put value in your own avodah, it's still worth nothing. If you could put a 1 in front of that 0, it turns a 10, it can turn into 100, 1,000, but it demands your avodah. So don't just boast about your grandparents. You have to act in a way that's befitting and following the paths of your holy grandparents. But either way, we are going to be focusing on Mishnah Yud Aleph, which is said by Avtalyon. Avtalyon, Chazal tell us, it comes from the words, he's an Av for the young people, that he was very caring to his Talmidim. He was very involved with the youth. That's the deeper message behind the name Avtalyon. And Avtalyon says like this: Chachamim hizaru b'divreichem. Chachamim, be very careful with your words. Now, our main focus of the shir is going to be to try to understand what these words mean. No pun intended. But what does it mean that Chachamim should be careful with their words? But let's take it on its most simple level. On the most simple level, Avtalyon had witnessed something in the previous generation which was tremendously dangerous and left tremendous negative effects on Klal Yisrael. What did he witness? He witnessed that Antignos Ish Soichoi made a big announcement, and he said, Al tiyu ka'avodim ha'mashamshim esarav ha'manas lekabel pras. Don't be like servants that serve the Eibishter for reward. Serve the Eibishter without a reward. Now, it seems like he wasn't so clear when he said that. And some of his Talmidim, Tzodek and Baitus, they understood that to mean that there is no schar. So they said, if there is no schar, he meant, even though there is schar, don't serve for the schar. They took it to mean that there is no schar. You have to be very careful with your words. I want to tell you a story. What the Gemara tells us in Psachim, Daf Samach Beis, the Gemara tells us a story of one of the Amoraim that came to a city and was trying to teach the people in the city the dinim of how to bake matzahs properly. And he said the only water, matzah can only be baked with mayim shelanu. Now, mayim shelanu, the word lanu means water that was slept on. In other words, you take it the night before, you draw the water. So it's mayim shelanu, it's water that was drawn before to bake the matzahs. But the word shelanu also could mean our water. Shelanu, ours. The people there were very literal. And the next day, they all came knocking at his door for water. Shelanu. He said, only your water? Okay, Rabbi. So where's your water? They didn't explain. He didn't think that they would misunderstand the word shelanu. You have to be very careful what you say, how you say it. You better know your crowd when you're talking, because here you had a whole group of Yidden that they didn't draw water because they thought that shelanu means it has to belong to the rabbi. But either way, Tzaddik and Baitus, they said that it can't be, and they disregarded the words of the Chachamim, And from that, we suffered for generations from the Tzedukim and the Baitusim, these people that went against the word of the Eibishter, and they started saying they only believe in Torah Shebichsav, which really, the Rambam says, they really wanted to not believe in anything. But they realized they wouldn't get a following in Klal Yisrael. Really, they were koifrim completely. But they just blamed their kfira on Torah Shebichsav, that they only believe in Torah Shebichsav. So Avtalion wanted to make sure the Chachamim are very careful with what they speak. Because maybe something is going to happen and Yidden are going to be dispersed in other lands. Meaning, even if your Talmidim where you are understand what you're saying, but if your words are not 100% clear, the words spread or things go out. And then they'll come to places where the Talmidim are not as holy and as worthy, and they're going to hear what you say, v'yamusu, and they will die, and we'll soon see if that means a spiritual death or a physical death. V'nimtza shem shamayim mischalel, and that will cause a tremendous chilul Hashem. So in order to prevent this tremendous chilul Hashem, Avtalion is telling all the Chachamim to be very careful with their words. Now, before we go back to analyze and go in depth to the words Chachamim hizaru b'dvareichem, I want to explain to you what is the chilul Hashem. The Mishnah says, "V'nimtza shem shamayim mischalel," that if you are not clear with your words, it could end up by a chilul Hashem. Now, chilul Hashem is one of the worst averos that we ever can do. You know, someone does an aveda on their own, quietly, whatever. Chilul Hashem is a tremendously negative thing that we go to all extent, not chas v'sholem, to make a chilul Hashem. What is the chilul Hashem? What is it that we are trying to prevent? So, the Bartanura explains the most pashta level, the most pashta explanation. The most simple explanation is that having kfira in the world is a chilul Hashem. Hashem wants that the das HaTorah should be relevant and prevalent in the world. Hashem wants that the way that He wants the world to run and people should act should be the dominating topic of discussion. If your words are going to create a corruption and a kfira mindset by people, like the fact that Tzaddik and Baitus created the Tzedukim and the Baitusim, so it comes out that you are bringing into the world deos betelos, you're bringing foreign and kfiradika hashkafis into the world, and having those kfira mindsets in the world is a chilul Hashem. So we have to make sure that there's less kfira in the world, and therefore, if you're not careful with your words, you may be the cause that there are hashkafis, people with hashkafis of kfira in the world, haya loisia. The Tiferes Yisrael, he adds to that, and he says that, just paraphrasing what he's saying, just itself having people which are going against the name of the Eibishter is bad, but that's not necessarily the full chilul Hashem. Whatever shita you think about, there's always going to be a fringe movement that speaks against it. Till today, you have people which they're called flat earthers. They still believe that the world is flat. You can bring them as many proofs as you want. Pictures, you can take them on a plane and circle the earth with them. It doesn't matter. They believe the earth is flat. They believe people never landed on the moon. People believe everything. Anything that you take for granted, you're going to find a group of people which have conspiracy mindsets. They have other ideas, and it's a fringe idea. So just the fact that there are going to be people that are koifer in Hashem, that in itself is not so much a chilul Hashem, says the Tiferes Yisrael. Where is the Chil Hashem? The Chil Hashem comes when the kfira becomes a little bit mainstream. And how does it become mainstream? When they have someone of importance, a real person to hang their hat on. As long as it's their own ideas that they are saying, oh, we're against Hashem, we don't believe in Torah Shebichsav, Torah Shebal Peh, Baba Maisis, that itself, first of all, it's just empty words, and it's not very attractive. It doesn't bring other people in. However, when it's said that what I'm saying is based on the words of a tzaddik, based on the words of a Talmud Chacham, and I can show you his words, all of a sudden it brings validity to the words of the kfira. The Chil Hashem is that the kfira now has what to base itself on and make it mainstream. And in other words, your words are going to be the cause that the kfira is going to be accepted. We know the Gemara tells us, I think it's Gemara Psachim, that when Rabbi Akiva was in prison, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai came to visit him, and he wanted to learn Torah from him. And there was a whole discussion. Rabbi Akiva didn't want to teach him. At the end, Rabbi Akiva did teach him. And in one of the 5 teachings that he told him, it says that when you teach something, hang your teaching on a big tree, which one of the Mefarshim explain it is, if you're going to say something, say it's your chiddush, say big deal. It's your, who are you already? You were in the same generation. But if you can find basis in your words from a previous generation's tzaddik, Talmud Chacham, so then much more people are going to accept what you're saying. Same thing over here, lahavdil. If the words of the Chachamim can become misused and abused, and it's going to create now validity in the eyes of the masses, because the person's going to manipulate your words, and now you need to prove it's not my kfir idea. This is said based on the words of Rabbi so-and-so. All of a sudden, people are going to say, okay, oh, Rabbi so-and-so, there must be something here. And people are going to take it more serious, and that could have obviously a tremendous influence, in this case, a negative influence. And therefore, you have to be careful, because you are going to be the cause of the continuous Chil Hashem. Another explanation is, and this, until now, the word Viyamusu is to be taken spiritually, that someone that's living with Toras Hashem, Toras Chayim, anyone that's following the ways of Hashem in the pure Emunas Chachamim way is really Chayim, is really alive. Somebody that got disconnected from the Mesoides Yisrael, someone that unfortunately had the influence of Klippa enter their minds, is now via Musu. They died. The death is referring to, obviously, spiritual death, that they've died spiritually. But now we're going to focus on the words, the actual physical death. And that is that people which are involved in kfira, so many times Hashem will punish those people. Now, if someone is a kafir and they get punished and they die, but nobody thought that their words were based on Torah, so then it's not only not a Chil Hashem, it's a Kiddush Hashem. It proves and it shows that you go against the words of Hashem, you're going to get punished. But Rashi tells us, listen to this very deep pshat from Rashi. Rashi tells us that what happens if somebody is a kofer, deep inside he's a kofer, he denies Hashem, but he's not saying it in his own kfira. He keeps on saying that it's based on the words of this tzaddik. So in the eyes of most people, that person is not a kofer. That person is following the ways of the Chachamim, because he's using his kfira based on the words of the Chachamim. Hashem knows the truth that he's a kofer, and this person is going to get punished. But what are people going to say? The people that see this person getting punished, and they look at him as a Talmud Chacham, they look at him as someone that follows the words of the Chachamim. So they're going to say, you see, Torah doesn't protect you. We were told that if you learn Torah and you follow the ways of Torah, you don't get punished. These people were following their Rebbes. These people were following the derech of the tzaddikim, and they got punished. So it shows that Torah does not protect you. And if Torah doesn't protect you, it's a chilul Hashem. That's what Rashi says. Which means you have to be very careful in what we say, because instead of the punishment being looked at as a kiddush Hashem, these people getting punished could come out and be looked at as a chilul Hashem. Now, the famous tzaddik, Reb Simcha Bunim of Peshischa, was a tremendous tzaddik. I mean, I'm not going to get into his whole life story. I mean, he was a tremendous person, but he was for many years like a tzaddik nister. He was a professional pharmacist. He had quite a colorful life. He would dress in the Western way, and a lot of people were very weary of him at the beginning. They didn't realize his tzidkus. Well, he was obviously a tremendous, tremendous tzaddik. And he says a vort. And before I share the vort, I'll share with you a vort of one of the people that quoted him, was the famous Reb Meir Shapiro. Reb Meir Shapiro was the founder of the Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin. And he also started the whole Daf Yomi, tremendous Go'in Talmud Chacham. And Reb Meir Shapiro was once giving a hesped. He was once explaining by a funeral. And he asked the question. And he said, why is it that when a Yid passes away, we say Kaddish? If you ask your average person that doesn't know what they're saying, I mean, even people which are not frum, they know what Kaddish is. They come, they say Kaddish, Yiskadal, Yiskadash. They come to the shul, they say Kaddish. If you ask them, what do you think Kaddish means? They'll say, it probably says that the soul of this person that departed should be elevated. That's the way they assume what Kaddish means. Then you actually take the translation of the words of Kaddish, and it says, Yiskadlo v'yiskadash Shmei Rabbah, that Hashem's name should be elevated and great. We're talking about Hashem's name, or we're talking about this person's neshama? Why, when a Yid passes away, do we have to reaffirm the greatness of Hashem? What's the connection? How do the words of Kaddish, Yiskadlo v'yiskadash Shmei Rabbah, which is referring to Hashem's name and Hashem's glory and Hashem's kavod, how does that fit in with the whole idea of Kaddish? This is what Reb Meir Shapiro asked. And he said, based on the teaching of Reb Simcha Bunim of Peshischa, that Reb Simcha Bunim said that every time a Yid passes away, doesn't matter, from a Yid or Frai Yid, every time a Yid passes away, the kavod of the Eibishter gets diminished. Meaning, he says a mashal, a king that has 1,000 loyal servants or 1,000 children, if one of those loyal servants die, so now there's someone that's not serving the king. That doesn't, so the king's ability to have influence is diminished. Every single Yid is a neshama, has the ability to spread godliness in the world. Every Yid that passes away is a chilul Hashem. Chilul Hashem meaning that there's a missing, now that there's something, there's one less emissary to bring Hashem's kavod to the world. So because right now there's a void in Hashem's presence being revealed in the world, so the descendants of that person say, Yiskadal v'yiskada Shmei Rabbah, that they reaffirm Hashem's greatness. They make up for that void that's left in the world, because that person was a living Kiddush. Every Yid is a Kiddush Hashem. A Yid passing away is a Chilul Hashem. So therefore the children pronounce and they say that we reaffirm that the Eibishter is real and the Eibishter is great. And with that, they fill the void that's left from the neshama that passed away. The idea is that the Chilul Hashem is the very passing of a Yid. And this Yid had to pass away because he was learning Kfirah. Any Yid that passes away is now a Chilul Hashem. So it's not just that people are going to say that Torah didn't protect him, like Rashi says. Al pi pnimius, according to Chassidus, the very fact that a Yid passed away, doesn't matter what type of Yid, that itself is a Chilul Hashem. But clearly, however we want to explain what the Chil Hashem is, according to the different Mefarshim, we want to prevent that. And therefore, we have to make sure the Chachamim, Hizaru b'divreichem, the Chachamim are careful with their words. But now I want to go a step further. And maybe, because a lot of times, we say, okay, so we're not such Chachamim. We don't have such Talmidim. We don't have such, influence. So the Mishnah is not really talking to me. Let's see how we can take it a little bit more, make it a little bit more subjective, maybe different approaches to the words, Chachamim, Hizaru b'divreichem. So there is a famous Pirush on Pirkei Avos called Medrash Shmuel. And the Medrash Shmuel says like this, that Chachamim Hizaru b'divreichem, what it means that Chachamim should be careful with their words, its message is not just what they say, like the simple taich of the Mishnah. Rather, the intent here is to make sure that our actions match our words. Right where I'm sitting in Cincinnati, Ohio, down the block from where I'm sitting, just a few feet away, there's a office of a family of Yidden that the Bachram, they go, they put tefillin with. And before Pesach, the Bachram were not here. So I went myself to put tefillin with these Yidden and to make sure that they sold their chametz for Pesach. And I went to the office and I saw that in the office they had a nice sign. And the sign said like this, I can't hear the words you're saying because your actions are making too much noise. The idea is that people are not just judged by their words. Their actions speak louder than our words. And what happens when somebody does not back up his preaching with his actions? There's a famous expression, to practice what you preach. The idea is that if you want to have influence, if you actually want to have an effect on other people, so then you have to practice what you preach. And this, according to the Medrash Shmuel, is the lesson over here. He says, if you're not going to practice what you preach, it's going to lead to a tremendous Chilul Hashem. What is the Chilul Hashem? So first and foremost, you are going to, two things. A lot of people are not going to accept what you're saying. Not only will they not accept what you're saying, you will lose stature in their eyes. When people look at someone that's just a preacher and doesn't act and doesn't live by what he teaches and what he preaches, not only are his words not effective, that's one thing, it's actually destructive because the people lose respect for authority. The Gemara tells us, like Charva Yerushalayim, the Churban happened because they were mevazveis Talmidei Chachamim. Because people were not respectful towards Talmidei Chachamim. They were mevazveis, they spoke negatively and they were disparaging of Talmidei Chachamim. So obviously, no one should ever speak negative of a Rav, but Talmid Chacham. But what if the Rav, so to speak, is begging for such bizbuz? By example, by not practicing what he preaches to others. So then not only are people not going to listen, it's almost automatic, it's only natural that they're going to breed resentment. And that's going to lead to negative feelings towards the Talmid Chacham. And the Mefarshim say that because of that, we're going to end up in Galus. We're going to end up in exile, because what causes Yidden to stay in Galus is the fact that they're mevazos Talmidei Chachamim. V'nimtza shem hashamayim mischalel, and it comes out that the fact that we are in Galus, the greatest Chilul Hashem is Yidden staying in Galus. I was watching a video last night of the Rebbe. They have the daily video. It's about a minute. So in yeshiva by us, after Ma'ariv every night, they play the daily video. And the Rebbe was speaking by a Farbrengen how to explain to a child why Mashiach must come now and not in a second from. What's the big deal? Come in a second. Why do we have to demand Mashiach now? And the Rebbe spoke at length and he said, tell a child that when the Eibishter is in Golus, first of all, the Shechina is in Golus, and Hashem is surrounded by hundreds and thousands and millions of Malachim. Every second, they're all in Golus. Everyone, the whole, all everything, and the whole Pamalia Shomaila is in Golus. So it's not 1 second, it's 1 second of millions and millions and millions of Malachim. Can you imagine how much that accumulates? Ever says, tell the child, that's more pennies that are in the treasury in Washington. In other words, the child, you have to speak to them on their level. The Golos is a Chil Hashem. If Hashem is the creator of the world, so then Hashem's presence should be revealed. How is it that we have a world and people could bichlal deny the presence of Hashem? That's crazy. It's a Chil Hashem every moment in Golos. And if the Talmid Chacham is not careful with what he says, and that breeds resentment, and people start speaking negatively about Talmidei Chachamim, they end up being inadvertently the cause of Golos, because those comments are going to keep Yidden in Golos longer. It brought about the Churban, and it keeps us in Golos. So we have to do as much as we can that people should not speak negatively about Rabbonim. At least the Rabbonim should act and practice what they preach. That itself will take away a large part of the resentment. In addition, say the Mefarshim, if they don't practice what they preach, let's say people are not turned off. Let's say people do not speak negatively. That's a whole group of people. But what the people that do listen, what are they going to learn? They're going to learn that it's okay to not practice what they preach. And that itself is a Chil Hashem, that we're going to have generations and generations of people not practicing what they preach. I once heard a tremendous chinuch lesson. And again, I'm sharing it. Everyone can take it on their own and think about it. And obviously, we're not talking about an extreme. But the shaila is, a father brings his child to shul. We're not talking about a child that's disturbing others, running around, hitting, screaming. The child is sitting next to the father. What's the best chinuch that this child can see? The father that's davening, and even if the kid misses parts of davening, he sees the tatev as davened. Or every 2 minutes, the father is pointing to the child where he needs to be holding by davening. So today, many mechanchem will tell you that it's much better for the father to daven. Why? Because the child will learn that when you get older, you daven. Not that when you get older, you show your children how to daven. If you never, in other words, because everything repeats itself. If you don't daven and you're busy showing your kids where to daven, they're going to grow up and just show their kids where to daven. But no one's going to end up davening. However, if you daven, and the child will grow up, and so what? When he's a kid, he'll miss parts of davening. He'll get away with davening less. But he will see, as medavent, he'll see that when you get older, you focus on Pirush HaMilos. That he'll learn. And when he gets older, he'll daven. And his kids will daven. So by not practicing what you preach, those that follow you end up making Chil Hashem too. Because they do not act in a way that's befitting. So that is one pshat. The Medrash Shmuel, Derech Agav, before we get to the next pshat, which is amazing, the Medrash Shmuel also says, Chachamim hizaru b'divreichem, refers to the gzeiros of the Chachamim. Sometimes a Rav will see that the community is not being strict about a certain din. So they'll make an extra chumrah, they'll make an extra gzeira on the tzibur. But let's say the family of the Rav himself will say, we don't need that gzeira because we're already keeping the Torah. So they won't practice, they won't be so careful about the very gzeira that they made on the tzibur. So it comes out again, when people see that the chachamim don't take their own gzeira seriously, they don't value the words of the chachamim because they feel that it only applies to the masses and it doesn't apply to them. So that will also create a chilul Hashem. Another pshat is based on a alshich, a very interesting pshat. And that is, we all know the din that we go into Golos, we go into a yid that kills someone by mistake, maki nefesh b'shkoga, has to go to the Ir Miklat, has to run to Golos. If you look at our Mishnah, the Mishnah says, Shema techoivu choivas Golos, like you will end up being you will get the choiv of Golos. It's a very, very nuanced lashon. So Mefarshim say that we're talking about a Rav or a teacher that's not careful with how he addresses his Talmidim. We know the din is Hamal ben Pnei Chaveri Berabim, someone that embarrasses somebody else. Kilu Hargoy. It's as if he killed him. The person loses blood. It's a terrible thing. Someone that embarrasses somebody in public is Kilu Hargoy. It's like he killed that person. What happens if a teacher is Mal ben Pnei Talmidoi Berabim? He embarrasses his student, but he said it like a joke. It was B'shoigeg. Says the Aftalion, who was very sensitive to how people accept things and how because he got insulted, as we just told you earlier, and he was sensitive to Talmidim, said, if you're going to be Malbin with your words, you're going to end up you're going to, as if you killed someone b'shoigeg, and you really are deserving to go, just like someone that kills someone b'shoigeg ends up in Golos, so to you are going to be mechuyev Golos, and that is a chilul Hashem that such a tzaddik has carrying this burden of malbim pnei chaveri berabim. It's a tremendous chilul Hashem. But I want to share. We're going to finish with a whole new understanding in the words Chachamim hizaru b'divreichem, and this is especially based on the fact that they come from Gedim. In other words, that they had a more broader chinuch. If someone grew up in a not Jewish family, they obviously were not so insulated. And they went to non-Jewish schools and heard a lot of non-Jewish ideas. And the Maram Shik, which I think he was writing, especially when the Haskalah movement was beginning to take root, wrote the following pirush. And I want everyone to understand this. He says like this: many times, the greatest of the Talmidei Chachamim learned secular subjects. Not only did they, for example, the people of the Sanhedrin, they had to know the languages, they had to know the world. And many Rabbonim who are already established in their Yir Shemayim, and they finished learning through Shas and Poiskim and all the Svarim of Ashkafa, these Chachamim are already well-established people. So to them, when they learn Chachmas Chitzonim, when they learn, other philosophies, medicine, whatever is it that they're learning, all that learning actually helps them in their avodas Hashem. It actually helps them because they can now elevate the world. But a lot of times when people see that it doesn't affect them, they forget that it's very, very destructive for people that are not on their level. People which are not yet on the level of the Talmud Chacham, what is permissible and could be even advisable for the Talmud Chacham, for the Rav, can be extremely harmful, negative, and have tremendously dangerous spiritual effects on the person that's not holding on that level. So if you're going to ask this Talmud Chacham, is he allowed to talk about, and is he allowed to study? Is he allowed to learn these things? The answer is yes. Says the Maramshik, but these are divreichem. These are things that are only permissible for special people. You hizaru chachomim b'divreichem. You must be careful that people don't say that because you studied and you know, so therefore it's permissible for us. Think about our Rebbe. The Rebbe went to the Sorbonne, he went to universities, he has college degrees in education, engineering, he had a very wide-ranging secular education. Yet he was hizaru b'divreichem. He made clear to everybody the dangers of getting lost in secular education. On the contrary, people asked the Rebbe, you're a hypocrite. You're telling them not to go in these universities and to study all these things. This is today, everyone sees the dangers of these universities. But then everyone thought that you won't be able to live life without getting your college degree. And the Rebbe says, how could you demand that of someone else if you yourself went to college? To which the Rebbe responded, it's because I went to college. I can tell you firsthand that it's not a place for a young, from boy who's not sheltered and not on the level of a Rebbe, the Rambam, these people. In other words, on the contrary, they erst know themselves. And Shmaya and Naftalion, they came from a background which was much more cultured. They came from Mishpachas Gedim. They were able to thrive because they had special neshamas. But they saw firsthand the dangers of this type of hashkafas. And they wanted to make sure that for generations to come, if we have tzaddikim, if you have rabbonim, Rosh Yeshiva, that for whatever reason, for their particular shlichus, they were able to not be affected, and they, on the contrary, they're able to use out the chachmas of the world and avodas Hashem. They should never forget that it's only them. But be careful with your words, that you clear to your talmidim that this is only for you. It's divreichem, and it's not for others. And I want to tell you a gewaldige Zach. The Seder Adoyre says that you know who was the Gilgul of Avtalion because he was so careful with philosophy, with Chochmas Chitzonim. The Seder Adoyre holds, and it's a huge controversy, but the Seder Adoyre holds that Aristotle, the famous philosopher Aristotle, at the end of his life, he converted to Yiddishkeit and he regretted all the shtusim that he taught, and he was madrich the world. And he said the entire truth is found in Torah. The Seder Adoyre also says that Aristotle was the Gilgul of Avtalion. The neshama of Avtalion schlepped back Aristotle to Kedusha, because Aristotle and Avtalion, they also came from a background which was not Yiddish, and brought it back. What koyach did he have to even, why? Because he's the one that understood the dangers of Chochmas Chitzonim. Like Aristotle regretted later everything that he taught, all the shtusim that he shared with other people. This is a very important lesson. And it's not just about Chochmas Chitzonim. In each age and stage, a person should think to himself. I'll give you an example. Let's say for whatever reason, a person has a smartphone. And of course, they have a filter. But for older, their work, they need it. And they'll say, oh, what's the big deal? If I could have it, my kids could have it. We forget that there's a bridge that has to be gone over. And hizaru b'divreichem, be careful, what's for you is not good for, many times not good for your talmidim. And first, and of course, the main thing is that we should be careful with the words of Torah, invest ourselves in limud Torah, pnimiyas Torah. And the biggest chil Hashem to prevent is the chil Hashem of Golos, and we should be zoichet the kiddush Hashem of Bias HaMoshiach, and it should be tekef umiyad mamish. Now again, thank you again for listening. If anyone has any questions, now is the time to ask.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
The grace of Yeshua.
It's my pleasure and honor.
I have a question.
Sure.
How could it be that Avtalion became his neshama was put into Aristotle, who wasn't Jewish, or does it mean that Aristotle's neshama was Jewish, and so by the end of his life, he converted?
Right. We hold, the Mishnah says, Ger shenisgayer. And the Gemara says that the neshamas of Gedim were by Matan Torah. We believe that every Ger who ends up being nisgayer, the neshama was there the whole time, it just had to be redeemed, had to be brought out.
Okay, that explains it. Okay, thank you.
And again, this is a vart from the Seder Adoiris in the Mar Mekoimes that I'll send out. You'll be able to see it yourself.